Okay, manna. Manna, it's mentioned in verse 4, I will rain down bread from heaven, and the word manna is actually mentioned in verse 15 of chapter 16. Verse 15 reads, when the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? For they did not know what it was. Manna, translated, is what is it? I love that. Manna simply is, what is it, is the word. And I love that that's what they chose to describe it. And I think it's quite appropriate because we don't know what it was. We really can't explain it. The naturalistic argument of this phenomenon, they can't explain it. They can't explain how this dew somehow was there in the morning and they were able to go and scrape it up. What do we know about manna? It tastes good. It tastes like honey. We had it mentioned here that it was in the description of it, that it was a white substance similar to coriander seed and tasted like wafers made with honey. That's verse 31. Other places it mentions that it was sweet and tasted like honey. It was also mentioned as tasting like olive oil. What could they do with it? They could eat it as is. They could grind it. They could mill it. They could boil it into a porridge of sorts. They could mill it into a grain, so to speak, and make bread out of it. The bread of heaven. Numbers 11:8. The people went around gathering it and then ground it in a hand mill or crushed it in a mortar. They cooked it in a pot or made it in loaves, and it tasted like something made with olive oil. Psalm 78:24 calls it the grain from heaven. We also got that in 16:4, as I mentioned, the bread from heaven. It is not just to sustain people, but also to remind them that they are alive solely because of God's provision. It is the bread of life. And when you hear that, I was reminded of a Bible verse, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Well, where is that from? Jesus specifically says that. So we're going to skip around to a few verses here. I've got 3 of them that I want to reference. The first one that I want to hit, and join me, leave a marker here, and join me to go to Matthew chapter 4. And we're going to see where Jesus actually says these words, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. It's Matthew chapter 4. I'll give you a second to get there. So what is the context of this? Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. What's the context? Why is Jesus saying this? Well, let's read. Let's actually pick it up on verse 1. Chapter 4, verse 1 of Matthew. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. Jesus answered, it is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. I have a little reference here in my Bible, and it references Deuteronomy 8:3. So let's see, flip now to Deuteronomy 8:3. I'll give you a second to get there. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. We see here, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. That's the end of verse 3. So Jesus is quoting from Deuteronomy. When he's tempted by the devil, he's hungry. He has been fasting for 40 days, wandering in the desert, and Satan tempts him and says, hey, if you really are the Son of God, you can look at those stones and you can turn them into bread. You can simply say, turn to bread, and they will turn to bread. And Jesus quotes Scripture. He attacks and goes on the offensive with Satan by using the sword of the Spirit, which is our Bible. And he says, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. But for context, let's not just read the single verse, but let's actually start on verse 1 of Deuteronomy 8. Be careful to follow every command I am giving you today, so that you may live and increase and may enter and possess the land the Lord promised on oath to your ancestors. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years, to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then he fed you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothes did not wear out. Your feet did not swell during these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, so the Lord your God disciplines you. Jesus is referencing, when he's tempted by Satan, he references this specific verse. And this verse is referencing, it's not about the food. It's not about the manna itself. It's not about the bread. It's about following God and realizing that everything you have is from the Lord. So Jesus, when he's saying this, he's saying it's not about me being hungry. There are way more important things than being hungry. It is about relying on God and trusting him to provide. Man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the Lord. In the same way, the manna from heaven was a daily reminder for the young people of God, the toddlers, so to speak, of daily reliance and provision from God. There's one other verse that I want to read, and that is John 6, where this is Jesus actually talking about manna. So, you don't need to leave a marker in Deuteronomy, but do flip with me to John 6, and we're going to pick it up. John 6, 31 is where we're going to pick it up. This is a conversation that Jesus is having. And it's talking about Jesus being the bread of life. You can read, I really would like to take the time and read, starting on verse 25, but I'm going to skip ahead and start it on verse 29. The work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. So they asked him, what sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you, that you are the one who was sent? What will you do? Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. So these people who are questioning Jesus, if he truly is to believe in the one he has sent, if he's the one they're supposed to believe, they're asking for a sign. Jesus responds, verse 32, very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Verse 34, sir, they said, always give us this bread. Verse 35, Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. You could continue on. In fact, I recommend that you do, not right now, but do follow up and read the rest of John chapter 6. It's a phenomenal chapter. Context for us today. The Old Testament is full of pictures, and the New Testament brings them to light and gives truth to them. And this is an example of that. Jesus is our manna. Jesus is the bread of life that we need daily to be able to survive. In the same way that Israel needed manna every single day, Jesus is our manna. Okay, flipping back. Verse 16